My mother-in-law thought she could use her God-fearing reputation as a weapon to dismantle my family and steal my daughters. She didn't realize that the higher you sit on a pedestal, the harder you hit the ground when the truth finally pulls it out from under you. This is how I used a stack of high-quality printing and a choir of gossiping church ladies to dismantle a matriarch's empire. If you believe that some bridges don't just need to be burned, but nuked for the sake of your children, hit that subscribe button. Like this video if you're ready to see what happens when a good Christian woman meets a mother with nothing left to lose. Let's get into it. To understand the level of venom I was dealing with, you have to understand the family I married into. For 20 years, I wasn't just a wife. I was an accessory to a carefully curated image of suburban sanctity. My ex-husband, David, was the golden boy of a small, tight-knit, and frankly, suffocating church community. His parents, Martha and Arthur, were the pillars. Martha, specifically, carried herself with a kind of practiced humility that is actually just a mask for total, unchecked narcissism. For years I played the part. I held the potluck trays, I nodded during the long-winded sermons about submission, and I ignored the coldness in Martha's eyes whenever I excelled at my career. You see, I was the breadwinner. David was charming, but he was financially flighty. In Martha's world, a woman making more than her husband was a biological error. A sin she tolerated only because it kept her son in nice cars and expensive suits. Then the world shattered. A year ago, David died in a car accident. The grief was a physical weight, a suffocating fog that settled over me and my two daughters, Sarah and Chloe. But as the fog began to lift, the monster stepped out of the mist. We found his phone. We found the bank statements. We found the life he had been living in the shadows. David wasn't just cheating. He had an entire second family. 2 young boys, born to an affair partner who, tragically, had also passed away shortly after the accident. My daughters were the ones who found the photos. They were the ones who saw the texts. Imagine being 15 and 17, grieving a father you idolized, only to realize he was a stranger who had betrayed your mother for years. The trauma didn't just break their hearts. It hardened them. But while we were drowning in the reality of David's double life, Martha and Arthur were busy spinning a different web. They didn't care about the betrayal. They cared about the boys, the male heirs David had produced. They started a campaign of harassment that started with grief counseling and ended with a legal filing for custody of my daughters. They wanted my girls, they wanted my house, and they wanted to force a blended family, where my daughters would play babysitter to the evidence of their father's infidelity. The tension was a humming wire, stretched to the breaking point. I was mid-divorce when he died, the paperwork sitting in a folder like an unexploded bomb. I thought, surely, after the funeral, they would leave us to heal. I was wrong. Martha didn't want peace. She wanted a performance. The turning point happened on Chloe's 15th birthday. My girls had been through hell, therapy sessions, court dates, and the constant looming shadow of their grandparents' entitlement. I wanted one day of normal. One day where we didn't talk about lawyers or bastard brothers. We went to the local weekend market. It's one of those idyllic places, smelling of wood smoke, fresh sourdough, and expensive honey. I gave Chloe a budget and told her to go wild. Get the chocolate, get the handmade jewelry, just be a kid for an hour, I told her. An hour later, my phone vibrated. It was Chloe. When I answered, I didn't hear happy birthday chatter. I heard her sobbing. Mom, they won't let me leave. They're saying things. Please come. I grabbed Sarah, and we sprinted toward the far end of the stalls. My blood was already boiling, but nothing prepared me for the sight. My 15-year-old daughter was backed against a wooden pillar, surrounded by 6 older women. These weren't strangers. I recognized 3 of them from Martha's prayer circle. They were the deacon's wives, the moral police of the community. They were berating her. In public. In front of a crowd of shoppers. You're a selfish girl, one was hissing, her finger inches from Chloe's face. Your grandparents are grieving, and you turn your back on your own blood? Those poor baby brothers have no one, and you're here buying sweets? It's unchristian. It's shameful. I didn't think. I didn't strategize. I moved. I stepped between them, my shoulder hitting one of the women hard enough to make her stumble. Get back. The leader of the group, a woman named Beverly who had known me for a decade, didn't even flinch. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. We're only doing what Martha asked, dear. Someone has to teach these girls the values you've clearly abandoned. You're the worst of all, refusing to obey your husband's parents like a good Christian wife. No wonder David looked elsewhere. The world went white. I told Sarah to take her sister to the car. I stayed. I let them have it. I screamed until my throat was raw, until the market security had to intervene, and until those holy women were scurrying away like the vultures they were. But as I drove my shaking daughters home, I realized they weren't acting on their own. Martha had weaponized her entire social circle. She had told them a story, a Hallmark movie version of the truth where she was the victimized grandmother and I was the cold heartless witch keeping her from her rightful family. That night, after I tucked my girls in and checked that they were finally asleep, I sat in the dark with a glass of wine and a laptop. I reached out to a contact, a man from the church who had always been a bit of an outcast because he actually practiced what he preached. "What is she saying?" I asked him. He sent me the screenshots. It was worse than I thought. Martha had posted a manifesto in the church's private Facebook group. She claimed I was leaving her and Arthur homeless and penniless, ignoring the fact that they had inherited David's entire life insurance policy and bank accounts. She claimed my daughters hated children, and that's why we wouldn't take in the affair babies. But the biggest lie? The saving grace of her story? She told the church the other woman wasn't an affair partner. She told them the woman was our surrogate. She claimed I was barren and unfit, and that I had rejected the boys simply because they were boys. She had turned my trauma into a holy crusade. And in that church, where cheating is the ultimate unforgivable sin, she had wiped David's slate clean by making me the villain. I felt the last of my patience snap. If Martha wanted a holy war, she was going to get one. But she forgot one thing. I had the receipts. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I went to a high-end print shop. I didn't want messy, grainy photocopies. I wanted clarity. I spent 4 hours with a technician, formatting a document that would change everything. I had the divorce discovery folder, a treasure trove of everything David thought he had hidden. I printed high-resolution photos of David and his mistress, caught by the private investigator months before he died. They weren't surrogacy meetings. They were photos of them in our living room, on our vacation, making out in cars. I printed the texts. Not just the ones between David and the woman, but the ones between Martha and David. The texts where Martha told him, "Don't worry, she'll never find out. Just keep her happy so she keeps paying the mortgage." The texts where Martha called my daughters ungrateful bastards, because they dared to be angry that their father had a second family. The coup de grace was an email Martha sent to my 17-year-old Sarah, just 48 hours after David's funeral. It said, "Your father's blood is on your hands. If you hadn't told your mother about his mistake, he wouldn't have been driving frustrated that night. You killed him." I felt a cold surgical calm as I assembled the prayer song packets. I bought 20 professional binders. On the cover, I used the same font and style the church used for their weekly hymnals. They looked official. They looked sacred. Inside the front cover, the first thing anyone would see was the photo of David and the mistress. Underneath in elegant script I wrote, "A love story, the truth behind the surrogacy." I spent the afternoon personalizing them. I highlighted the parts of the texts where Martha mocked the very women she sat next to in the pews. I included the bank statements showing the 6-figure insurance payout she claimed didn't exist. Sunday morning arrived. I knew the schedule. The greeters were always busy at the front doors, but the back entrance near the choir loft was usually empty 15 minutes before the service. I walked in, dressed in my best Christian wife attire. I looked humble. I looked broken. I walked to the back desk where the songbooks were kept, the ones for people who forgot their own. I tucked my special editions right into the front of the stacks. Then, I didn't stay. I didn't need to hear the sermon. I knew the congregation would provide all the preaching I needed. I went home, made a pot of tea, and waited for the digital world to catch fire. It started around 11:30 a.m. My phone didn't just ring. It exploded. The Facebook group that had been a nest of vipers for me 48 hours ago was suddenly a battlefield. One of the younger members, someone who had always suspected Martha's holiness was a sham, had posted a photo of the binder. Then another. Then a recording of the commotion in the lobby. Apparently Beverly, the woman from the market, had been the first to open one. She had reached the page where Martha described her as a meddling, bored old crow who would believe anything if you slapped a Bible verse on it. Beverly's scream was allegedly heard over the opening organ notes. The gossip mill in a small church is faster than fiber-optic internet. By the time the pastor stood up to speak, half the congregation was looking at Martha and Arthur with wide-eyed horror. The surrogacy lie was dead. The penniless lie was dead. And the bullying of my daughters? That was the nail in the coffin. Even in a community that values family, calling your grieving granddaughters murderers is a line you can't uncross. The aftermath was glorious in its silence. Martha tried to post a defense, claiming the binders were forgeries of the devil. But you can't forge 20 years of specific, agonizingly detailed text history. The pastor, realizing his pillars were actually rotting timber, had to get involved. He issued a statement about truth and repentance. Martha and Arthur were shamed into a sabbatical that everyone knew was an expulsion. They stopped showing up. The friends who had harassed my daughter at the market sent handwritten apologies, likely out of fear that I had more binders with their names on them. I didn't but let them sweat. I received an invitation to return to the church for support. I declined. I don't need a pews full of people who only support the truth when it's printed on high-quality paper. My daughters and I sat on the porch that Sunday evening. For the first time in a year, the air felt light. The legal case for custody? It evaporated. No judge was going to give children to people who had been publicly denounced by their own moral community for harassment. Martha made one final post on her personal wall. She complained that no one cares for the elderly, and that her great son would have protected her. It was a pathetic, whimpering end to a reign of terror. She wanted the world to see her as a saint. I just made sure they saw her in high definition. Revenge isn't always about violence or anger. Sometimes, it's just about holding up a mirror in a room full of people who are terrified of their own reflection. Martha built her life on a foundation of lies. I just stopped helping her hide the cracks. Justice is a dish best served with proof. Have you ever had to expose a wolf in sheep's clothing to protect your family? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of people finally getting what they deserve. Until next time.